Hey, I'm Noam Weissman, and you're listening to Unpacking Israeli History, the podcast that takes a deep dive into some of the most intense, historically fascinating, and often misunderstood events and stories surrounding Israeli history. Sheikh Jarrah. Many of us probably had not heard of this Jerusalem neighborhood before May of 2021. And now, we're hyper-focused on questions surrounding the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. Why is there an eviction? Is this a housing dispute or something else? How is any of this related to Hamas suddenly shooting rockets from Gaza? These are excellent questions. But to be fair, my take is that precisely in the heat of the moment, we don't want to raise the temperature. My style is to take a step back and ask, how did we get here? What do I need to know? What is the history? We're deep in the weeds prepping season 2, working on episodes about critical events in Israel's history and topics that are often unexplored, like Sabra and Shatila, the 1982 massacre of Palestinian civilians in a refugee camp in Beirut, Lebanon. Many blame Israel for this, but that seems overly simplistic. What is the real story? And UN Resolution 3379, passed in 1975, in which the United Nations declared that, quote, Zionism is a form of racism and racial discrimination. This topic seems quite relevant right now. These are intense topics. We know. We call these sorts of topics the eye of the storm, and we think it's just so important to learn history in order to understand the present. But we couldn't wait until the new season to record something, because as we speak, we're living through what can only be described as a terrifying time in Israel. Families are huddled in shelters as bombs explode above them. There are protests and riots all over the region. There is anger, there is fear. For many, there is despair. And for some within this fear, there remains an unrelenting hope. But there are real implications. People are afraid. And through it all, I check Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube, and every news site I can think of. And I can't help but ask myself, why is this being reported so poorly? Every headline, every article is cherry-picking facts. There's a terrifying and upsetting moral equivalence between the IDF and Hamas, and too many people are firing off tweets without any sort of insight or knowledge. And on the other side, I'm hearing talking points to be delivered as though our young people are automatons. No one seems to be getting this right. I'm not saying we have it perfect either. But I do think this is where unpacking Israeli history has such a critical role to play. From the beginning, our goal for this podcast was always to explore the questions of Israeli history, to really get to know the stories, including the confusing gray areas, and to make meaning of the present, to be transparent and give the real context to the complicated, messy world of Israel, which has a few warts perhaps, but is full of wonders. Only with that nuanced approach will we really understand Israeli history. And only when we understand that history will we be able to understand the very textured Israeli present. And friends, we absolutely must do it. I don't know if I'm being hysterical here, but the way I see it, people's lives depend on it. So we're continuing to work on the next season with an increased sense of urgency. And as we do, we think and pray for everyone and for peace for all people and all peoples. New episodes will drop next month. In the meantime, you could brush up on past episodes by downloading them in your podcast feed or by listening at jewishunpacked.com/podcasts. In particular, I think it's uber important to listen to our episode on Der Yassin, and closer to home, our episode on the First Intifada, our episode on the Second Intifada, and I pray that we do not need to ever make an episode on a Third Intifada. Wherever you stand on the political spectrum, I hope we can all agree on that. Yalla, let's do this.